The story of the judges in Israel. Imagine a nation with no king, no standing army, no palace and no throne, just a people and a promise. Welcome to the world of the judges of Israel. This is not a neat, polished story. It is raw, chaotic, violent, brilliant and tragic. The story of a nation that keeps falling apart and a God who keeps stepping in. Have you ever watched someone repeat the same mistake again and again? That is Israel in this era. They forget, they rebel, they are conquered, they cry out, and then, from the most unexpected places, a deliverer rises, a left-handed assassin, a prophetess who commands an army, a timid farmer hiding in a winepress, a Nazirite with uncut hair and unstoppable strength. These are not kings but judges, not robed magistrates in courtrooms, but warriors, prophets, and leaders raised up in moments of crisis. And here is the question that runs through every episode. What happens to a people when there is no central authority, no visible king, and everyone decides what is right for themselves? The stories you are about to see are intense. Battles fought with trumpets and torches, enemies defeated with tent pegs and millstones, betrayals that shatter families, civil war that nearly wipes out a tribe, courage that changes history, and weakness that ruins destinies. This is the era where faith flickers but never fully dies, where deliverance comes in the darkest hour and flawed people become instruments of divine rescue. As you watch, ask yourself what kind of leader a broken nation needs, what kind of strength truly saves, and what happens when freedom is given but responsibility is ignored. Step into the turbulence, step into the battles, step into the cries of a restless nation. This is the story of the judges of Israel. The incomplete conquest after Joshua. When Joshua died, the memory of his voice still lingered in the hills of Canaan. He had led Israel across the Jordan, he had seen Jericho fall. He had divided the land by lot among the tribes. Now he was gone, 110 years old, buried in the territory of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim. The elders who had outlived him still remembered the mighty acts they had seen. But a generation was rising that had not stood before Jericho's walls, had not marched around the city in silence, had not watched the sun stand still. The tribes gathered, they sought the Lord, asking, "Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites, to fight against them?" The answer came, Judah. The tribe of Judah rose with resolve. They called upon Simeon, their brother tribe, to go up with them into their allotted territory. Together they advanced against the Canaanites and Perizzites. At Bezek they fought fiercely. 10,000 fell. Adoni-Bezek, the local ruler, fled, but they pursued him, captured him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes, just as he himself had done to 70 kings before him. He was brought to Jerusalem and died there. Judah pressed on. They fought against Jerusalem and captured it, striking it with the edge of the sword and setting the city on fire. They went down into the hill country, the Negev and the lowland. They fought against the inhabitants of Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and struck down Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there they advanced against Debir, once called Kiriath Sepher. Caleb, son of Jephunneh, still strong though old, declared that whoever attacked and captured Kiriath Sepher would receive his daughter Aksa as wife. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it. Aksa became his wife. Later she asked her father for a blessing and requested springs of water along with the land he had given her. Caleb granted the upper and lower springs. Judah continued its campaign, with the Lord with them. They took possession of the hill country. Yet when they came to the plains, they could not drive out the inhabitants who had iron chariots. The valleys remained contested ground. The tribe of Benjamin, dwelling among the hills near Jerusalem, did not drive out the Jebusites living there. The Jebusites remained in Jerusalem, living among the Benjaminites. The house of Joseph, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, also went up against Bethel. They sent spies. A man came out of the city, and they showed him mercy in exchange for revealing a secret entrance. They struck the city and burned it, but the man and his family were spared. He went into the land of the Hittites and built another city there. Yet Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan, Tanach, Dor, Ibleam or Megiddo. The Canaanites persisted in dwelling in those lands. When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not fully drive them out. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. The Canaanites lived among them in Gezer. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or Nahalal. The Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, Sidon, Alab, Aksib, Helba, Aphek, or Rehob. The Asherites lived among the Canaanites, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth-Shemesh or Beth-Anath. They lived among the Canaanites of the land, though the inhabitants of those towns became subject to forced labor. The tribe of Dan faced even greater difficulty. The Amorites pressed them back into the hill country and would not allow them to come down into the plain. The Amorites persisted in dwelling in Mount Heres, Ajalon, and Shalbim. Only when the power of the house of Joseph grew strong were they put to forced labor. Across the land the pattern repeated. Some cities fell, some strongholds were broken, yet pockets of resistance remained everywhere. Instead of removal, there was accommodation. Instead of separation, there was proximity. Canaanite towns stood beside Israelite villages. Their markets operated side by side. Their customs and altars did not disappear. An angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and spoke to the people. He reminded them that God had brought them up from Egypt and sworn to give them the land. He declared that the covenant would not be broken. But he also reminded them of the command not to make covenants with the inhabitants of the land and not to break down their altars. You have not obeyed my voice, the messenger said. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. When the people heard these words, they lifted their voices and wept. They offered sacrifices there and named the place Bochim, meaning weepers. Still, life went on. Fields were planted. Harvests were gathered. Israel dwelt in houses they had not built and drank from wells they had not dug. Yet in many regions, Canaanites remained. They tilled their own fields, spoke their own tongues, and worshipped their own gods within sight of Israel's settlements. The land was divided. The inheritance was assigned. But it was not fully possessed. Villages stood close together. Interactions became common, trade occurred. Neighbors observed neighbors. The clear separation that had once marked Israel's march under Joshua softened into shared borders and unfinished work. And so, after the death of Joshua, Israel settled into the land, not in complete conquest, but in partial possession. The hills, valleys, and plains bore witness to both victories won and victories left undone. Israel's first apostasy and the rise of Othniel, after the generation that had stood with Joshua faded from the land, the memory of conquest began to thin. The elders who had seen the Jordan part and Jericho fall were gone. A new generation rose, one that had grown up among vineyards already planted and houses already built. They knew the land, but they did not know the Lord in the way their fathers had. The Canaanites still lived among them. Their towns stood near Israelite settlements. Their fields bordered Israelite fields. Markets were shared. Wells were shared. Seasons passed side by side. With time, altars appeared in places where Israel had once wept at Bochim. Groves of carved poles stood beneath spreading trees. Images shaped by human hands were set up right in clearings. The names of Baal and Asherah began to be spoken openly. Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. Offerings were brought to foreign altars. Incense rose in places not commanded. Rituals once forbidden became familiar. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel. He gave them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram-Naharaim, a ruler from Mesopotamia beyond the rivers. His power stretched far, and his reach extended westward into the land of Canaan. Armies marched across the plains. Garrisons were established. Tribute was demanded. For 8 years Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim. Grain harvested from Israelite fields was carried away. Flocks were counted and taxed. Strong men were conscripted. Town gates were watched by foreign soldiers. The sound of another language echoed through marketplaces. Fear settled like dust. The tribes that had once marched in unity under Joshua now found themselves bowed under a distant king. Years passed in that condition. At last, the people cried out to the Lord. Their cry rose from fields and villages, from mothers grinding grain, from elders seated at gates, from shepherds on hillsides. It was not the cry of victory, but of distress. The name they had neglected now returned to their lips. The Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel. His name was Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. He was not unknown among them. Years earlier, he had captured Kiriath-Sepher and taken Achsah, Caleb's daughter, as his wife. He was of the tribe of Judah, from a house already marked by courage. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He rose to judge Israel. He went out to war. The movement began quietly, then gathered strength. Men rallied around him. Trumpets sounded across hills and valleys. Tribes answered the call. Weapons were sharpened. Shields lifted. Othniel led them against Cushan-Rishathaim. Battles were fought across contested ground. Dust rose beneath marching feet. Steel clashed. The foreign banners that had flown over Israelite towns were met with resistance. What had been submission turned to confrontation. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim into Othniel's hand. The armies of Aram-Naharaim were driven back. Garrisons fell. Tribute ceased. The foreign yoke was broken. The land had rest. For 40 years there was peace. Fields were planted without fear. Harvests were gathered and kept. Children grew up hearing not the language of oppressors, but the stories of deliverance. The altars to Baal stood abandoned in many places. The name of the Lord was spoken again in thanksgiving. Othniel judged Israel during those years. His leadership brought stability. Disputes were settled. Order returned. The memory of oppression faded slowly, replaced by the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. Then Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. He had risen in a time of turning and had brought relief. The land had known both subjugation and deliverance in his days. His name remained tied to that first cycle, when Israel turned away, suffered under a distant king, and was restored through the hand of a man upon whom the Spirit of the Lord had come. Ehud and the assassination of Eglon. After the death of Othniel, the land did not remain steady for long. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. The altars that had once been abandoned were restored. The names of foreign gods were spoken in homes and fields. What had been corrected returned. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel. Eglon did not come alone. He gathered the Ammonites and the Amalekites. Together they crossed into the land and struck swiftly. They captured the city of palms, a fertile and strategic place near the Jordan. Moabite banners rose there, and their authority spread outward. For 18 years Israel served Eglon, king of Moab. The weight of it was constant. Tribute was demanded. Harvests were measured and taken. Livestock was counted and taxed. Moabite officials walked through Israelite towns, collecting what was owed. The humiliation was sharp, and it lasted nearly 2 decades. At last, the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. In response, the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, son of Gera, a Benjaminite, a left-handed man. Ehud was chosen to carry tribute to Eglon. The task required someone trusted, someone able to stand before the Moabite king without drawing suspicion. He prepared carefully. He fashioned for himself a sword, double-edged, about a cubit in length. It was short enough to conceal, sharp on both sides. He strapped it to his right thigh, under his garments. Because he was left-handed, the placement would not be expected. Most men wore weapons on the left side for drawing with the right hand. His blade lay hidden on the opposite side. With other Israelites carrying tribute, Ehud traveled to present the payment to Eglon. Eglon was a very fat man. He received the tribute in his royal residence, a structure that stood elevated and guarded. The exchange was formal. The goods were presented. The obligation fulfilled. When the tribute had been delivered, Ehud dismissed the people who had carried it with him. They began the journey home, but Ehud turned back. Near the carved stones at Gilgal, he left his companions and returned alone to the king's residence. He requested a private audience. "I have a secret message for you, O king," he said. The words caught attention. Eglon commanded silence. The attendants withdrew. Guards stepped back. The chamber emptied until only the king and Ehud remained. They were in the cool roof chamber, an upper room designed for comfort. Ehud approached. "I have a message from God for you," he said. At the mention of God, Eglon rose from his seat. In that moment, Ehud reached with his left hand. He drew the sword from his right thigh in one swift motion and thrust it into Eglon's belly. The blade went in completely, the hilt following after it. The fat closed over the blade, and he did not pull it out. The king collapsed. The chamber was silent except for the heavy fall of his body. Ehud moved quickly. He closed and locked the doors of the roof chamber behind him and slipped away. The corridors were quiet. Servants below, seeing the locked doors, assumed the king was relieving himself in the cool room. They waited. Ehud passed by the carved stones and escaped toward Seirah. By the time the servants grew concerned and unlocked the doors, they found their lord fallen on the floor, lifeless. Ehud had already reached the hill country of Ephraim. There he sounded the trumpet. Its call echoed across valleys and ridges. Men gathered at the sound. They descended from the hills, armed and ready. Ehud stood before them. "Follow me," he said, "for the Lord has given your enemies the Moabites into your hand." They followed him down toward the Jordan. They seized the fords of the river, cutting off escape routes. When Moabite forces attempted to retreat or regroup, they were met at the crossings. About 10,000 Moabite men fell that day, all strong and able-bodied. Not a man escaped. Moab was subdued under the hand of Israel. The oppression ended, tribute ceased, foreign banners were torn down. The city of palms returned to Israelite control. The land had rest for 80 years. Fields were planted again in security. Children grew up without memory of Moabite rule. Trade resumed without foreign oversight. The hills and valleys echoed not with the commands of oppressors, but with the ordinary sounds of life restored. Ehud, the left-handed deliverer from Benjamin, had entered a king's chamber alone and emerged with the nation's freedom secured. And for 80 years, the land remained quiet. Shamgar and the Philistine threat. In the years after the fall of Moab, when the land had known long stretches of quiet under the deliverance won by Ehud, danger did not disappear. It shifted. Along the coastal plains to the west, the Philistines were growing in strength. Their cities stood fortified near the sea, their warriors disciplined, their weapons formidable. They moved inland in raiding bands, pressing toward Israelite villages, testing borders, seizing what they could. Their incursions were swift. They would descend upon fields at harvest time, driving off livestock, stripping grain, intimidating settlements that lay near the lowlands. The threat was constant enough to keep watchmen alert and farmers wary. Israel, though delivered from Moab in the east, faced pressure from the west. In those days there lived a man named Shamgar, son of Anath. Little is recorded of his lineage beyond his father's name. He did not emerge from a royal household. No long introduction announces him. He appears within the tension of a moment when threat meets resistance. The day came when Philistine warriors advanced into Israelite territory in force. 600 of them, armed and confident, moving with the boldness of men accustomed to victory. Whether they came as a raiding party or as a punitive expedition, their numbers were significant. Villages lay exposed in their path. Shamgar was not a commander of armies. He did not stand at the head of gathered tribes with banners raised. What he held in his hand was an ox goad. An ox goad was a farmer's tool, a long staff used to drive cattle while plowing. One end was pointed to prod the oxen forward. The other often bore a flattened or sharpened tip for clearing clods of earth from a plow blade. It was sturdy, built for work in the fields. It was not a sword. It was not a spear. When the Philistines came, Shamgar did not retreat. The encounter must have been sudden. the kind that erupts without warning. Dust rising in the distance, the gleam of weapons under the sun, the rumble of approaching feet. With only the tool in his hand, Shamgar confronted them. The clash was fierce. The ox goad, swung with force, became a weapon. The pointed end drove forward, the hardened shaft struck with crushing blows. In close combat, strength and resolve mattered as much as forged steel. 600 Philistines fell by his hand. The scene would have been chaotic. A single man against many, the ground marked by struggle, yet he did not yield. The instrument of labor became the means of deliverance. The Philistine threat in that moment was broken. Word of what had happened spread quickly. Villages that had braced for destruction heard of the fallen invaders. The number alone would have astonished those who listened. 600, struck down not by an army, but by one man with a farmer's staff. Shamgar saved Israel. His act stands briefly recorded, without extended speech or song. Yet it sits firmly within the unfolding story of a people repeatedly pressed and repeatedly delivered. He did not establish a dynasty. He did not rule for decades. His name surfaces in the midst of threat, marked by decisive action. And in that moment, when Philistine aggression surged, a man with an ox goad stood his ground and turned the tide. Deborah and Barak defeat Sisera. After the death of Ehud, the pattern returned again. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. The land that had known rest grew restless once more. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazah. His authority stretched across the northern territories. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Sisera commanded 900 iron chariots. They were not light wooden carts. They were reinforced, formidable, fitted for speed and intimidation on the plains. When they rolled across open ground, the earth trembled beneath them. Against such power, villages without fortified walls stood vulnerable. For 20 years Jabin oppressed the people of Israel cruelly. Trade routes were controlled. Travel was dangerous. Highways fell silent as travelers avoided main roads. Village life shrank inward. Gates that once stood open were barred more often than not. In those days Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel. She sat beneath the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. The people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She listened to disputes, rendered decisions, spoke words that carried authority. Her presence was steady. From beneath that palm tree she sent and summoned Barak the son of Abinoam from Kedesh Naphtali. She delivered the command plainly. Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Barak listened. The task was clear, yet he answered, If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Deborah replied without hesitation, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. She rose and went with Barak to Kedesh. Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to follow him. 10,000 men went up at his heels. They ascended Mount Tabor, a height that rose distinctly above the surrounding plain. From there they could see the valley stretching wide. Sisera was informed that Barak son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor. He gathered all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the men who were with him, from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. The plain near the Kishon River spread wide and open, suitable for chariot warfare. The day of confrontation arrived. Deborah said to Barak, Up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go up before you? Barak descended from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. The battle erupted below. The Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and all his army into panic before Barak by the edge of the sword. Confusion spread among the Canaanite ranks. The ground near the Kishon River became treacherous. The iron chariots, so formidable on dry plains, faltered. Barak's forces pressed the advantage. The clash of metal, the cries of warriors, the thunder of hooves filled the valley. Sisera abandoned his chariot. He fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim. All the army of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a man was left. But Sisera himself escaped. He fled to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. There was peace between Jabin king of Hazah and the house of Heber the Kenite. Sisera sought refuge, believing himself safe. Jael came out to meet him. "Turn aside, my lord," she said. "Turn aside to me. Do not be afraid." He entered her tent. She covered him with a rug. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." She opened a skin of milk and gave him drink. Then she covered him again. He said, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'" Exhaustion overtook him. The flight, the defeat, the collapse of his army weighed heavily. He slept deeply. Jael moved quietly. She took a tent peg in her hand and a hammer. Approaching softly while he lay fast asleep from weariness, she drove the peg through his temple until it went down into the ground. The force pinned him where he lay. He died there, in the tent that had seemed a place of refuge. As Barak pursued Sisera, Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." He entered her tent and saw Sisera lying dead, the tent peg through his temple. On that day God subdued Jabin king of Canaan before the people of Israel. The hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin until they destroyed him. After the victory, Deborah and Barak sang on that day. Their song rose in triumph, recounting how leaders took the lead in Israel, how the people offered themselves willingly. They praised the Lord for the shaking of earth and the flowing of rivers. They spoke of how highways were deserted and travelers walked by byways until Deborah rose, a mother in Israel. They celebrated the willingness of Zebulun and Naphtali who risked their lives on the heights of the field. They sang of kings who came and fought, yet took no plunder of silver. They sang of the stars fighting from heaven, of the river Kishon sweeping the enemy away. They honored Jael, most blessed of women in tents, who struck Sisera, crushed his head, shattered and pierced his temple. The song closed with a prayer. "So may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might." And the land had rest for 40 years. Midianite oppression and the call of Gideon. Midian came like a swarm each year. When the time of harvest approached and the grain stood golden in the fields of Israel, dark lines would appear along the horizon. At first they seemed like drifting shadows, then they thickened into men, camels, and tents. The Midianites, joined by Amalekites and other peoples of the east, poured across the Jordan and spread out like locusts. Their camels were beyond counting. They pitched their camps in the valleys and devoured the land. They did not come to settle. They came to strip. Crops that had taken months to grow vanished in days. Sheep and oxen were driven off. Donkeys were seized. Vineyards were trampled. By the time the invaders withdrew, nothing green remained. The people of Israel were left staring at fields scraped bare, as though fire had passed over them. Fear settled over the land. Villages were abandoned. Families carved hiding places into hillsides. Caves in the mountains became homes. Strongholds were built among rocks. When Midian appeared, farmers fled with whatever grain they could carry, slipping into crevices and ravines to wait until the storm passed. Year after year this happened, 7 years of humiliation and hunger. The cry of Israel rose upward at last, thin from weakness yet heavy with desperation. They remembered the Lord and called upon his name. Before deliverance came, a prophet arrived. He stood before the people and spoke plainly. He reminded them how the Lord had brought their fathers out of Egypt, how he had delivered them from slavery and driven out their enemies, how he had given them the land in which they now trembled. He repeated the command they had been given not to fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land they dwelt. The words hung in the air like a charge. Then the prophet departed. In the territory of Abiezer, in the town of Ophrah, a young man named Gideon worked in secret. His father, Joash had land there. In another season Gideon would have threshed wheat on an open hilltop, letting the wind carry away the chaff. But these were not ordinary days, so he crouched inside a winepress, a hollowed space meant for crushing grapes, and beat out wheat with hurried strokes. Dust rose and clung to his face. He paused often, listening for the sound of approaching camels. Every movement was cautious. As he worked, a stranger came and sat beneath the oak that belonged to Joash. The man watched Gideon in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon looked up sharply. The words seemed almost cruel in their boldness. Mighty warrior. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and stepped out of the winepress, squinting at the stranger. "Please, my lord," he said, "if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers told us about, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." The stranger's gaze did not waver. "Go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian," he said. "Do not I send you?" Gideon felt the weight of the words press upon him. He gestured helplessly toward the hills and fields. "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." The reply came steady and certain. "I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." The air seemed to thicken around them. Gideon's heart pounded. He studied the stranger more closely, unease mingling with awe. "If now I have found favor in your sight," Gideon said carefully, "then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." The man nodded. "I will stay till you return." Gideon ran to his house. He selected a young goat and prepared it carefully. He baked unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. He placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, then carried them back to the oak where the stranger waited. He set the food before him. "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock," the stranger instructed, "and pour the broth over them." Gideon obeyed. Then the stranger reached out the tip of the staff in his hand and touched the meat and the bread. Fire sprang up from the rock. Flames consumed the offering in an instant. The smoke curled upward and vanished into the sky. At that very moment, the stranger disappeared. Gideon fell to his knees. His breath caught in his throat. He knew then that he had seen the angel of the Lord face to face. "Alas, O Lord God," he cried, "for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But a voice came to him, calm and reassuring. "Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Gideon remained there for a long while, the winepress forgotten. When he rose, he built an altar on that spot and named it "The Lord is Peace." The stone stood firm beneath the oak, a quiet testimony in a land of unrest. That same night, the Lord spoke to him again. "Take your father's bull, the second bull 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has. Cut down the Asherah that is beside it. Build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold here, with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down." Gideon lay awake, listening to the night sounds. The command was clear. The altar of Baal stood in his own father's household. The Asherah pole rose beside it. To tear it down would not anger distant enemies. It would anger neighbors. It would shame his own family. When darkness deepened and most had gone to sleep, Gideon rose quietly. He chose 10 of his servants, men he trusted. Without torches they made their way to the high place where the altar stood. The shape of Baal loomed against the sky. The Asherah pole cast a long shadow across the ground. They worked swiftly. Ropes were thrown around the altar. With straining arms they pulled until stones shifted and toppled. The structure groaned and collapsed. The Asherah was hacked at its base and fell with a heavy thud. They dragged it aside and gathered its wood. On the top of the stronghold Gideon arranged stones carefully, building a new altar to the Lord. The second bull was brought forward. The wood of the Asherah fed the fire. Flames rose into the night, consuming the offering. Smoke drifted upward in the darkness. Before dawn they slipped away. When the men of the town rose early the next morning, their eyes widened in disbelief. The altar of Baal lay in ruins, the Asherah was gone. In its place stood a new altar, and on it the remains of a sacrifice. Voices rose in anger. Who has done this thing? They searched and inquired until the answer came. Gideon the son of Joash has done this thing. A crowd gathered at Wash's house, fury blazing in their faces. Bring out your son, they demanded, that he may die, for he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. Joash stepped forward to meet them. He looked from face to face and then spoke with a firmness that silenced the shouting. Will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. The words unsettled the crowd. Murmurs replaced cries for blood. The demand for Gideon's death faded. From that day he was called Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal contend against him, because he had broken down his altar. The altar of the Lord stood on the stronghold above Ophrah. Smoke had risen there in the night, and something had shifted in Israel. The years of fear were not yet over. Midian still roamed. But in one household at least, Baal had fallen. And a man who once hid in a winepress now bore a new name. Marked by the fire that had leapt from a rock and the courage that had burned through the dark. Gideon's victory with 300 men. The call to arms spread quietly through the hills of Manasseh. Messengers ran from village to village. Men left their plows, their flocks, their half-mended walls. They gathered beneath Gideon's banner until the valley near the spring of Harod shimmered with tents and cooking fires. From there they could look northward and see the Midianite host spread across the valley like a dark sea. Camels shifted in the distance. Armor glinted in the sun. It was a sight that could hollow a man's courage. Gideon stood among his people, feeling the weight of command press upon him. He had already asked for signs and received them. On 2 mornings in succession, the fleece had lain before him, once wet with dew while the ground remained dry, then dry while the ground was soaked. The Lord had answered him with patience. Now the hour of action had come. But before the battle began, the word of the Lord came again. The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, My own hand has saved me. Proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home. Gideon swallowed. Too many. He looked at the thousands assembled and could not imagine having fewer. Yet he obeyed. He stood before the men and lifted his voice. Whoever is afraid, whoever trembles at the thought of what lies before us, return to your home. A long silence followed. Then one man stepped back, another followed. Soon movement spread like a ripple. Shields were slung over shoulders. Farewells were murmured. The sound of retreating footsteps carried across the camp. When the counting was done, 22,000 had departed. Only 10,000 remained. Gideon stared at the reduced ranks. Even 10,000 looked small compared to the vast Midianite camp. Again the word came, The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them there for you. At the spring the men knelt to drink after the long march. Some fell on their knees and bent low, plunging their faces into the stream. Others scooped water with their hands, lapping it to their mouths while their eyes remained alert. The Lord spoke quietly to Gideon. Every one who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise everyone who kneels down to drink. When the sorting ended, the number startled him. 300 men had lapped the water with their hands to their mouths. The rest, 9,700, had knelt. By the 300 who lapped I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand, the Lord said. Let all the others go every man to his home. Gideon watched as the great majority departed, their figures shrinking along the dusty paths. The camp grew eerily quiet. 300 men remained, scattered across the slope, small against the wide valley. That night, as darkness settled, Gideon lay awake. The Midianite campfires flickered below like a fallen constellation. Fear brushed against his thoughts. The Lord spoke once more. Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down with Purah your servant to the camp, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened." Gideon rose silently and beckoned Purah. Together they crept down the hillside, keeping to shadows and rocks until they reached the edge of the enemy camp. The air smelled of smoke and animals. Men lay wrapped in cloaks. Camels groaned softly. They drew near to a tent where 2 Midianite soldiers spoke in hushed tones. "Listen," one was saying, "I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian and came to the tent and struck it so that it fell and turned it upside down." His companion answered without hesitation, "This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp." In the darkness Gideon's breath caught. The fear that had clung to him loosened its grip. He bowed his head and worshipped, right there among the enemy's tents. He returned to his 300 with renewed resolve. "Arise," he said, his voice firm in the night. "For the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand." He divided the men into 3 companies. To each he gave a trumpet. In their other hands he placed empty jars, and inside each jar a torch. There were no swords distributed, no spears. He looked at their faces in the firelight. "Watch me, and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon." The night deepened. It was the beginning of the middle watch, when fresh guards had just been posted and others drifted into heavy sleep. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp. The other 2 companies spread around the perimeter, unseen in the darkness. At Gideon's signal, the silence shattered. Trumpets blared, sharp and piercing. 300 blasts split the night. At the same instant jars were smashed against rocks, clay shattered. Flames burst into view as torches flared in every direction around the camp. Voices rose in a thunderous cry, "For the Lord and for Gideon." To the half-awake Midianites it seemed as though a vast army had descended upon them. Light flashed from every side. The sound of trumpets echoed through the valley, magnified by panic. Men stumbled from tents, seizing swords in confusion. Camels broke their tethers and bolted. In the chaos they turned on one another. Blades struck friend and foe alike. Shouts of alarm turned to screams. The host that had once appeared countless now dissolved into terror. The 300 stood firm in their positions, blowing their trumpets and holding their torches high. They did not rush in. They watched as the enemy collapsed upon itself. Soon the Midianites fled toward the Jordan, toward Bethshitta and beyond. Messengers were sent to the hill country of Ephraim to seize the crossings of the river. Leaders of Midian were captured and struck down. The oppression that had crushed Israel for 7 years broke in a single night. When the pursuit ended and the land grew quiet, the men of Israel gathered around Gideon. Their voices carried gratitude and awe. "Rule over us," they said, "you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Gideon stood before them, dust still clinging to his cloak. He looked at the faces of the people who had once hidden in caves and winepresses. "I will not rule over you," he said. "My son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." The words settled over the assembly like a gentle wind. Yet Gideon asked one thing of them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." The Midianites had worn golden earrings, for they were Ishmaelites. The men spread a garment on the ground and cast into it the golden rings they had taken. The weight of gold grew heavy, gleaming in the sun. From this gold Gideon fashioned an ephod. He set it up in his city, in Ophrah. The garment shimmered, a symbol wrought from victory. But in time the people began to turn toward it. They came to look upon it, to seek something from it. It drew their hearts in quiet ways. Still, for many years the land had rest. The terror of Midian was gone. Fields were sown and harvested without fear. Children played in open spaces once more. And in Ophrah stood the man who had once threshed wheat in hiding, who had marched with 300 men carrying nothing but trumpets, jars, and fire, and who had refused a crown when it was offered to him. Abimelech's violent seizure of power. Gideon, who had once refused a crown, left behind many sons. They were born to him by his wives in Ophrah, and they filled his house with noise and rivalry. 70 sons in all, strong young men with claims to their father's name. But in Shechem there was another son, born to Gideon by a concubine. His name was Abimelech. He grew up away from the center of his father's household. His mother's people were Shechemites. He moved among them easily, speaking their language of kinship and ambition. And when Gideon died at a good old age and was buried in Ophrah, the land slipped once more into restless uncertainty. Abimelech saw his moment. He went to Shechem and stood before his mother's relatives. He gathered the leaders of the city and spoke plainly. "Ask yourselves," he said, "which is better for you, that all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh." The words found fertile ground. The men of Shechem listened, weighed the matter, and nodded among themselves. 70 potential rulers meant division and weakness. One man, their own kinsman, meant control and advantage. Their hearts inclined toward Abimelech. From the temple of Baal-berith they took 70 pieces of silver and placed them in his hand. With that money Abimelech hired reckless and worthless men eager for violence, men who would follow ambition wherever it led. He traveled to his father's house at Ophrah. There, on one stone, he slaughtered his 70 brothers, the sons of Gideon. One by one they fell. The stone ran dark with blood. The house that had once echoed with laughter became a place of horror and silence. But one son escaped. Jotham, the youngest, hid himself. Whether he slipped away at the first sign of danger or concealed himself among shadows and rubble, no one knew. He survived while his brothers perished. When the deed was done, the men of Shechem and the leaders of Beth Millo gathered beside the great oak near the pillar in Shechem. There they made Abimelech king. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and fresh blood when word reached Jotham. He climbed Mount Gerizim, which rose above the city like a watchful sentinel. From its height he could see the people assembled below. He lifted his voice and cried out, "Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you." The crowd stirred and looked upward. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them. Jotham called. They said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Shall I leave my abundance, by which gods and men are honored, and go hold sway over the trees?" Then the trees said to the fig tree, "You come and reign over us." But the fig tree said, "Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go hold sway over the trees?" Then the trees said to the vine, "You come and reign over us." But the vine said, "Shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go hold sway over the trees?" Then all the trees said to the bramble, "You come and reign over us." And the bramble said to the trees, "If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon." His voice rang against the slopes and drifted down into the city. "Now therefore, if you have acted in good faith and integrity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserved, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo and devour Abimelech." With that, Jotham fled. He went to Beer and remained there, far from the reach of his brother. Abimelech reigned over Israel 3 years. At first, power seemed secure in his grasp. But beneath the surface resentment stirred. The men who had helped him rise now watched him closely. Alliances thinned. God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. Suspicion hardened into hostility. The city that had crowned him began to undermine him. The leaders of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the hilltops. They robbed all who passed that way, hoping to weaken his authority and draw him into conflict. Reports reached Abimelech, and anger burned in him. Into this fragile situation came Gaal son of Ebed. He arrived in Shechem with his kinsmen and won the confidence of the citizens. During the grape harvest they went out into the fields, gathered their grapes, trod them, and held a feast in the house of their God. Wine flowed, words loosened. Gaal stood and shouted over the music and laughter. Who is Abimelech, and who are we of Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor the father of Shechem. Why should we serve him? If only this people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to him, increase your army and come out. Zebul, the ruler of the city and loyal to Abimelech, heard these words. His anger flared. He sent messengers secretly to Abimelech, warning him of Gaal's challenge. Under cover of night, Abimelech and his men advanced toward Shechem and divided into companies. At dawn, Gaal stood at the entrance of the city gate and looked out. He saw figures moving on the hills. Look, he said to Zebul, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. Zebul replied calmly, you mistake the shadow of the mountains for men. But as the companies drew nearer, Gaal's voice faltered. Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company is coming from the direction of the oak of the diviners. Zebul turned to him sharply. Where is your mouth now, you who said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are not these the people you despised? Go out now and fight with them. Driven by pride and necessity, Gaal led the men of Shechem out to battle. Abimelech met them in the open field and struck them down. Gaal fled back into the city, and Zebul drove him and his kinsmen out so that they could no longer dwell in Shechem. The next day the people went out into the fields again. When Abimelech learned of it, he divided his men into 3 companies and lay in wait. At the right moment they rose from their ambush and attacked. Some companies rushed to the city gate and cut down those who tried to escape. Others struck the people in the fields. The slaughter was relentless. Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured it, killed the people within, leveled it, and sowed it with salt. When the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard of this, they entered the stronghold of the temple of El-Berith. Abimelech was told where they had gathered. He went up Mount Zaman with his men, took an axe and cut down a branch from the trees. He lifted it to his shoulder and said, what you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have done. His men followed his example, each carried a branch. They piled the wood against the stronghold and set it ablaze. Smoke billowed upward, about 1,000 men and women perished there. But Abimelech was not finished. He went to Thebez and encamped against it, capturing the city. Yet within Thebez stood a strong tower. The men and women of the city fled there and shut themselves inside, climbing to the roof. Abimelech pressed forward to the tower and fought against it. He approached the entrance to set it on fire, as he had done before. From above, a woman looked down. She lifted a millstone, heavy and rough, the kind used daily to grind grain. With steady hands she let it fall. The stone struck Abimelech on the head. The blow crushed his skull. He staggered, blood pouring down his face. He called urgently to the young man who bore his armor. Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed him. The young man thrust him through, and he died there, before the tower he had meant to burn. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, each to his home. The fire he had kindled consumed him at last. Thus the violence that had begun on a single stone in Ophrah ended beneath another stone in Thebez, and the land bore once more the scars of a king it had never been meant to have. Tola and Jair governed Israel. After the smoke cleared from Thebez, and the echo of Abimelech's fall faded from the hills, the land lay bruised and weary. Shechem stood scarred. Fields once trampled by armies were slow to recover. Families counted their dead. The memory of brothers slaughtered and cities burned lingered like a bitter taste. Israel needed steadiness, not spectacle. It needed quiet strength after years of ambition and blood. In those days a man named Tola arose. He was the son of Puah, son of Dodo, of the tribe of Issachar. Though Issachar's inheritance lay in the north, Tola dwelt in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. From there he stepped forward to save Israel after the chaos left by Abimelech. There was no dramatic summons from a battlefield, no trumpet blast in the night. Tolah's rise was measured and deliberate. He gathered the elders, listened to grievances, and restored order where disorder had crept in. Villages that had wavered between rival factions found in him a firm center. Disputes were brought before him. Boundaries were remarked, oaths were renewed. The people came to Shamir, traveling along dusty paths that wound through olive groves and across rocky slopes. They stood before him with cases of land, livestock, inheritance, and injury. Tolah listened carefully. His words were steady, neither rush nor harsh. He weighed matters with patience, and his judgments settled tensions that might otherwise have flared again. The scars of Abimelech's ambition slowly closed. For 23 years Tolah judged Israel. Seasons turned under his watch. Barley ripened, was harvested and sown again. Children grew to adulthood knowing a land not torn by civil war. Though threats always lingered at the edges of Israel's borders, there was no sweeping calamity, no invading force like Midian in those years. Stability itself became a quiet gift. When Tolah's days were complete, he died and was buried in Shamir. The hills that had witnessed his steady governance received him into the earth. His name passed into memory as one who rose after violence and held the nation together. After him came Jair. He was a Gileadite, from the region east of the Jordan, where the land rolled wide and open. Jair stepped into leadership with a presence that carried both authority and prosperity. He judged Israel 22 years. Jair had 30 sons. They were young men of stature, each mounted upon his own donkey. In those days, to ride a donkey was a sign of honor and distinction. These were not beasts of burden straining under loads, but animals chosen for travel and display. When Jair's sons rode out, dust lifted behind them in soft clouds. Their presence on the roads spoke of influence and organized strength. They had 30 cities in the land of Gilead, towns that came to be called Havoth Jair, the villages of Jair. These settlements spread across the region like beads on a string, linked by allegiance to one household. In their gates elders sat and judgments were rendered. Markets thrived. Shepherds drove their flocks across open pasture. Watchmen stood upon walls scanning the horizon. Under Jair's leadership the eastern tribes found cohesion. Caravans passed more safely through Gilead. Fields were planted without constant fear of sudden raids. The rhythm of ordinary life returned again and again, steady as hoofbeats along a familiar path. Jair moved among his people, not as a conqueror, but as a ruler whose authority rested in continuity. His sons represented the extension of that authority, visible reminders that leadership could be orderly rather than grasp through bloodshed. For 22 years this pattern held. Then Jair died and was buried in Kaman. The donkeys no longer bore his sons along the same roads in the same way. The towns of Havoth Jair remained, but the voice that had bound them fell silent. 2 judges had followed the wreckage of Abimelech. Neither seized power with violence, neither crowned himself king. Instead they governed, year after year, through presence and persistence. And for a time, Israel lived in the calm between storms. Jephthah's tragic vow. The land of Israel once more sank under the weight of oppression, this time at the hands of the Ammonites. Year after year, they came against the people, seizing towns, levying heavy tribute, and casting terror into villages. The Israelites, bruised in spirit and desperate for deliverance, cried out to the Lord. Their pleas were laden with desperation, their voices trembling with fear and exhaustion. But the Lord, in his wisdom, raised a deliverer, Jephthah, a man whose life had been marked by rejection and hardship. Jephthah was the son of Gilead, born to a woman of low status and rejected by his own family. Cast out by his brothers, he fled to the land of Tob, where he gathered around him a band of outcasts and adventurers. These were men accustomed to hardship, battle, and the lawlessness of the margins. Jephthah became their leader, not by birthright but by courage and capability. Together, they survived, hunted, and skirmished, forming a group that could not be ignored. As the Ammonites pressed upon Israel, the elders of Gilead came to Jephthah. They approached cautiously, aware of his past rejection, yet desperate for the skill and ferocity he had honed. "Come and be our commander," they urged, "so that we may fight against the Ammonites." Jephthah's answer was measured, not proud, but pragmatic. He reminded them of the injustice of his past exile, of the years he had spent wandering and fighting with no recognition. Yet, the urgency of the Ammonite threat prevailed, and he accepted their plea, agreeing to lead Israel to battle. Before setting out, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, a pledge born of both devotion and desperation. "If you deliver the Ammonites into my hands," he said, "whoever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in triumph shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering." The words hung heavy in the air, a promise made with a heart full of faith but blind to the cost. His companions listened in silence, understanding both the seriousness of the vow and the risks it might entail. The campaign against the Ammonites was swift and decisive. Jephthah marshaled the forces of Gilead, trained men of courage, and led them into battle with careful strategy and relentless determination. Clashes were fought in the valleys and hills, the cries of combat echoing through the wilderness. Jephthah himself fought at the forefront, a figure of strength and resolve, inspiring his men to press the attack. The Ammonites, unprepared for such leadership and cunning, faltered. Their forces were broken, their chariots overturned, and their morale shattered. In a matter of days, Jephthah had achieved victory. Israel was delivered, and the land breathed a sigh of relief, thankful to God and to the man whom they had once doubted. Yet the triumph bore a shadow. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, rejoicing in victory, the air was filled with the laughter and songs of celebration. But joy quickly turned to horror. As he approached the door of his house, it was his daughter, his only child, who came out to greet him, dancing and singing, tambourine in hand, celebrating her father's safe return. She moved with the innocence and lightness of youth. Unaware of the weight of her father's vow, the sight struck Jephthah with anguish. His heart sank, and tears filled his eyes. He remembered his pledge to the Lord, a vow made in the heat of desperation, and he saw that the cost had come to life in the form of the daughter he loved. He fell to his knees, voice trembling with grief. "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me great sorrow. You are the fulfillment of a vow I made to the Lord. I cannot undo it." The girl looked upon her father and, though startled, listened with a composure beyond her years. "Father," she said, "let me have 2 months to roam the hills with my friends and weep for my fate, for I shall never marry or bear children." Jephthah granted her this time, and she went into the hills, accompanied by her companions, weeping and lamenting the path that had been set before her by her father's oath. When the 2 months passed, she returned, and Jephthah, with a heart torn by love and duty, fulfilled the vow he had made. The sacrifice was carried out, a tragic fulfillment of faith and obedience. Israel mourned with him, and the story of Jephthah's daughter became a solemn remembrance among the people, marking the dedication, the cost of vows, and the heavy weight of promises made to the Lord. From that time on, the daughters of Israel observed a yearly custom of lamentation for Jephthah's daughter, a tribute to her sorrow and the gravity of vows taken before God. Through triumph and tragedy, Jephthah's leadership brought peace to Israel for 6 years, the land recovering from the oppression of the Ammonites. Yet the memory of his vow, and the heartache it wrought, remained a stark testament to the intersection of faith, duty, and human sorrow in the life of the judges. The story of Jephthah and his daughter lived on in Israelite memory, a tale told from generation to generation, warning of the weight of words spoken to God and the human cost of obedience. Even in moments of divine deliverance, Ibsen, Elon, and Abdon judge Israel. After the turbulent and often violent times of Israel under the earlier judges, the nation experienced a period of relative stability, shepherded by leaders whose names appear quietly in the annals of history: Ibsen, Elon, and Abdon. Their judgeships were marked not by dramatic battles or legendary feats, but by steady governance, attention to justice, and the maintenance of order in a land still recovering from cycles of sin and oppression. Ibzan, from Bethlehem, rose to leadership after Jephthah's turbulent era. He was a man of wisdom and discernment, known for his prudence in resolving disputes among the people. According to the records, he fathered 30 sons and 30 daughters. In an extraordinary expression of family ties and social strategy, he arranged marriages for all his children outside his clan, sending his daughters abroad and welcoming sons-in-law from various families. This practice strengthened alliances with neighboring clans, creating a network of mutual loyalty that reinforced social cohesion. His tenure as judge lasted 7 years, a period during which Israel enjoyed calm, free from foreign oppression, and the people benefited from his fair administration and measured leadership. Ibzan's life concluded with his burial in Bethlehem, leaving behind a legacy of stability and a family network that tied communities together. Following Ibzan, Elon from the tribe of Zebulun took up the mantle of leadership. Elon's judgeship is remembered less for military exploits and more for the quiet administration of justice. The people of Israel, in this period, were largely free from external threats, allowing him to focus on internal matters, resolving disputes, arbitrating conflicts, and ensuring that the laws and customs established by previous leaders were maintained. For 10 years, Elon presided as judge, his tenure reflecting a period of steady governance and continuity. His leadership emphasized the maintenance of communal harmony and the enforcement of justice, particularly among families and clans whose tensions might have escalated in the absence of an impartial authority. Upon his death, Elon was buried in Aijalon in the territory of Zebulun, marking the end of a decade of untroubled stewardship. After Elon, Abdon, son of Hillel, from the hill country of Ephraim, assumed leadership. Abdon was notable for his family and the number of sons and grandsons he fathered, 40 sons and 30 grandsons, each of whom rode on 70 donkeys. This display was not merely ostentatious, but served as a symbol of his authority, wealth, and the capacity of his household to administer responsibilities and maintain influence across the tribes. Riding on donkeys indicated status, mobility, and the ability to represent the judge in distant parts of the territory. During Abdon's 8-year judgeship, he exercised governance that maintained the peace among Israel's scattered communities. His leadership, like that of his predecessors, was more administrative than martial, focusing on ensuring that local disputes did not escalate and that Israel remained cohesive despite its diverse and often fractious tribes. At the end of his tenure, Abdon was buried in Pirathon in the hill country of Ephraim, the land of his forefathers, concluding a period of calm under 3 successive judges. Together, the judgeship of Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon illustrates a transitional period in Israel's history. They governed in times when foreign threats were minimal, allowing the nation to consolidate socially and politically. Each judge brought stability and order, strengthening communal ties, and ensuring the continuation of Israelite customs and laws. Their legacies, though quieter than the dramatic tales of Ehud, Deborah, or Gideon, were crucial in holding the fabric of Israelite society intact, preparing the nation for future challenges. Their leadership demonstrates that the preservation of peace and the judicious management of internal affairs were as vital to Israel's endurance as acts of military heroism. Philistine domination and the birth of Samson. In the days following the judgeship of Abdon, Israel once again descended into a pattern of sin, forgetting the laws and commands that God had given through Moses. The people turned to idolatry, worshipping the Baals and Asherahs that dotted the land, and forsook the covenant that bound them to God. Their hearts were hardened, their faith neglected, and their reliance on God grew faint. Seeing the nation's repeated disobedience, the Lord allowed the Philistines, a powerful and aggressive people from the coastal regions of Canaan, to dominate Israel. For 40 long years, the Philistines held sway over the tribes, exacting tribute, oppressing the people, and instilling fear with their might and weaponry. Their cities were fortified, their armies well-trained, and their domination made life in Israel a daily struggle for survival. The Israelites were humbled and tormented, and cries for deliverance rose continually from their hearts. Amid this climate of fear and oppression, the story of a deliverer begins not with an army or a warrior, but with a couple in the small town of Zorah, in the hill country of Judah. Manoah and his wife, both righteous before the Lord, were childless. Though Manoah was known as a man of faith, his heart carried the sorrow of years without offspring. One day, as the woman went about her daily tasks, an angel of the Lord appeared to her. The presence of the divine messenger was striking, radiant, and commanding. The angel announced that she would conceive and bear a son. This child, the angel said, would be set apart for a special purpose. He was to be a Nazirite from birth, dedicated entirely to God. He would begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines, wielding strength and courage unlike any before. The angel instructed her on the ways she must raise the child, including abstaining from wine, strong drink, and anything unclean, for he was to be devoted to God even before his birth. When the woman returned to Manoah, she recounted the extraordinary encounter in vivid detail. Manoah, upon hearing her story, prayed earnestly for guidance, asking God to send the messenger again so they could receive clear instructions for raising their son. In response, the angel of the Lord reappeared, this time to Manoah as well. Manoah fell to his knees in awe, recognizing the holiness and authority of the visitor. The angel repeated the instructions for raising the child and emphasized the divine purpose entrusted to him. Manoah, moved by reverence and gratitude, offered a sacrifice to God, and the angel ascended in the flames of the altar, confirming the divine origin of the message. As the months passed, the woman conceived, and the promise of God began to take shape within her womb. The anticipation of the child's birth filled the household with hope, contrasting the despair that had long gripped Israel under Philistine rule. The child was born, and true to the angel's declaration, he was named Samson, which means sun or bright, symbolizing the light and hope he would bring in a dark time. From the moment of his birth, it was clear that Samson was set apart, his life destined for extraordinary feats. Manoah and his wife raised him carefully, adhering to the Nazirite regulations that forbade the consumption of wine, the cutting of hair, and contact with the dead. The household maintained strict devotion, knowing that Samson's strength and mission were tied to his obedience and consecration to God. Samson grew up amid the oppression of the Philistines, witnessing firsthand the suffering of his people. The oppression was harsh. Philistine garrisons occupied towns, fields were taxed heavily, and the Israelites lived under constant fear of raids. Yet in this environment of despair, Samson's life was a beacon of promise. Even as a child, signs of extraordinary strength and character were evident. He displayed a courage and vitality that set him apart from his peers, foreshadowing the monumental acts of deliverance that he would accomplish in the years to come. His growth was watched closely by both his parents and the surrounding Philistine communities, for the significance of a child set apart by God for deliverance was understood in whispers and awe. The announcement of Samson's birth and his Nazirite dedication carried profound implications for Israel. He was not merely a child, he was a living sign of God's intervention, a promise of liberation from Philistine oppression. Every year of his early life, as he grew into manhood, was imbued with a sense of divine purpose. His upbringing, shaped by the angel's instructions, cultivated discipline, obedience, and the foundations of physical and spiritual strength. The story of Samson's birth stands as a vivid reminder that even during times of national sin and suffering, God's plan continued, bringing hope and preparation for the eventual deliverance of his people. Thus, Samson's arrival marked a turning point in the narrative of Israel under the judges. Born into oppression, yet under divine instruction, he would grow to be the instrument through which the Lord would act decisively against the Philistines. The early years, shaped by devotion, Nazirite vows, and careful upbringing, laid the groundwork for the exploits that would later define his life, feats of unparalleled strength, acts of courage, and moments of divine intervention that challenged the Philistine dominance and restored hope to a beleaguered nation. From the quiet annunciation to Manoah's barren wife to the boy's growth in Judah, Samson's birth story exemplifies the intertwining of human obedience, divine purpose, and the promise of deliverance, setting the stage for one of the most remarkable judges in Israel's history. Samson's early exploits. From his youth, Samson's life was marked by extraordinary strength and a sense of divine purpose. As he grew, the remarkable power promised at his birth became evident. One day, while traveling to Timnah to see a Philistine woman he wished to marry, Samson encountered a young lion in the vineyards. The lion, fierce and roaring, lunged at him, but Samson, moved by the Spirit of the Lord, grappled with the beast. With his bare hands, he tore it apart as one would tear a young goat. The carcass he left by the roadside, and later, when passing that way again, he discovered that bees had made a hive within the lion's remains. From this hive came honey, which Samson tasted and gave to his parents, unaware at first that it was from the lion. This early encounter revealed both his physical might and a connection to divine empowerment that would define his later deeds. Shortly after, Samson sought to marry the woman from Timnah, though this union would later be fraught with tension and betrayal. At the wedding feast, he posed a riddle to the 30 Philistine men, promising garments, a reward if they could solve it. The riddle, drawn from his encounter with the lion, asked, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. The Philistines struggled to decipher it for 7 days of the feast. Under pressure and through deceit, Samson's new wife coerced him into revealing the answer, and the men solved the riddle. Feeling betrayed by the treachery, Samson's anger burned fiercely. In a display of both strategy and force, he returned to Ashkelon, killed 30 Philistines, and took their garments to satisfy the wager he had lost. This act, though violent, demonstrated Samson's rising role as a deliverer for Israel, albeit one intertwined with personal emotions and grievances. These early exploits reflected both the extraordinary physical abilities bestowed upon him by God and the complex interplay of human desire, emotion, and divine purpose. From the encounter with the lion to the riddle at his wedding feast, Samson's youth was already filled with remarkable incidents that set the stage for the legendary feats he would perform against the Philistines. Each event revealed the growing tension between the oppressive Philistine rule and the God-ordained deliverance that Samson was destined to enact. The power he wielded, combined with moments of cunning and confrontation, hinted at the greater role he would play in liberating Israel from foreign domination. Through these formative experiences, Samson began to navigate the challenges of strength, faith, and human relationships, marking the beginning of a life that would leave a lasting impact on his people. Samson's feats against the Philistines. Samson's feats against the Philistines grew in boldness and audacity, cementing his reputation as a divinely empowered champion of Israel. One of his earliest acts of defiance followed the betrayal at his wedding feast. In a daring and clever reprisal, Samson captured 300 foxes. He tied them in pairs, affixing torches to their tails, and then released them into the Philistines' standing grain fields, vineyards, and olive groves. The foxes ran through the crops, setting fire to the torches and leaving behind a path of destruction that consumed the harvest, vineyards, and orchards. This act not only punished the Philistines for their deceit, but also sent a clear message that Samson would not be subdued, displaying a combination of cunning, symbolic retribution, and the sheer force of divine justice. As the Philistines sought to capture him for his repeated assaults, Samson's strength became legendary. During one encounter, he was confronted by a large assembly of Philistines, armed and ready for battle. In a moment of overwhelming power, Samson seized the jawbone of a donkey and improvised weapon and struck down 1,000 men. The sheer force with which he wielded the jawbone demonstrated both his supernatural strength and his unyielding determination to defend Israel. After the battle, exhausted but triumphant, he named the place Ramath-Lehi, the hill of the jawbone, commemorating the event. This feat illustrated not only his physical might, but also the dramatic and fear-inducing nature of his confrontations, making Samson a figure of terror among the Philistines and a symbol of hope for his fellow Israelites. In another extraordinary demonstration of strength and defiance, Samson carried the gates of Gaza to the top of a hill near Hebron. Under cover of night, he approached the heavily fortified city of Gaza, where the Philistines had stationed guards to prevent his movement. Using his immense strength, Samson lifted the massive city gates, which had likely been mounted on large stone foundations, and carried them on his shoulders for miles. He then placed them atop a hill as a visible and humiliating symbol of Philistine defeat and Israelite resilience. This act not only displayed his personal power, but also served as a public challenge to the Philistine authorities, underscoring that no fortress or city could contain the might of one empowered by God. These feats, while violent and extreme, underscored the unique role Samson played in Israel's deliverance from oppression. Each action, from the burning fields with torches to the slaying of 1,000 men with the jawbone and the audacious removal of Gaza's gates, demonstrated his extraordinary abilities, courage, and the divine mandate he carried. Through these acts, Samson became a living symbol of resistance and divine intervention, inspiring both fear among enemies and hope among his people. The combination of physical prowess, inventive strategy, and relentless defiance against the Philistines defined his life during this period, marking him as one of the most remarkable judges in Israel's history. Samson and Delilah. Samson's encounter with Delilah stands as one of the most dramatic and poignant episodes of his life, marked by deceit, betrayal, and the tragic turning of his extraordinary strength. The Philistine rulers, weary of repeated defeats and humiliated by Samson's feats, sought a way to subdue him once and for all. They approached Delilah, a woman of the valley of Sorek, and offered her a substantial bribe to discover the secret behind Samson's phenomenal power. Eager for the reward, Delilah agreed and began to court Samson, seeking both his affection and the hidden truth of his might. For many days, Delilah pressed Samson to reveal the source of his strength. She would lie beside him, speaking tenderly, asking repeatedly, and prodding him with insistent questions. Yet, Samson, bound by his vow as a Nazirite and his loyalty to God's mandate, refused to disclose the secret. He teased her with partial truths and clever misdirections, claiming at different times that he could be overpowered if bound with 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, or if new ropes were woven into his hair. Each time Delilah tried these methods, Samson easily broke free, demonstrating the unbroken link between his strength and his divine consecration. Delilah, growing frustrated, persisted, determined to uncover the truth that would end Samson's reign of terror over the Philistines. Finally, after prolonged persuasion, nagging, and emotional appeal, Samson's heart weakened. He revealed that the secret of his power lay in his Nazirite vow. His hair had never been cut, and so long as it remained unshorn, the Lord's Spirit endowed him with superhuman strength. Delilah listened intently, storing the secret carefully, and then acted swiftly, while Samson lay in sleep. Exhausted from her continual questioning, she called for a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. As the scissors cut through the sacred strands, the divine power that had flowed through him departed, leaving him humanly weak for the first time in his life. Delilah then sounded the alarm, alerting the Philistine lords that Samson had been betrayed. At that moment, the Philistines rushed in, binding him with strong cords. He struggled, but without the Spirit's empowerment, he could not break free. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him to Gaza, where they shackled him with bronze chains and forced him to grind grain in the prison, a cruel task intended both as humiliation and as punishment. In the darkness of the dungeon, Samson's fame as Israel's deliverer seemed extinguished. He was blinded, chained, and despised, reduced from a figure of invincible might to a prisoner of his enemies. Even in captivity, however, Samson's story remained remarkable. Though broken and humiliated, he endured the harsh conditions of prison, his hair slowly beginning to grow again. The Philistines, believing their enemy permanently subdued, celebrated their triumph, mocking Israel's judge as he labored before them. Yet, beneath the surface of captivity, the tale of Samson and Delilah remained a tale of both human vulnerability and the enduring link between the divine mandate and human action, a moment where strength, deception, and divine timing intersected in dramatic and unforgettable fashion. Samson's final act. Samson's final act unfolded in a setting of both triumph and tragedy, a culmination of his life's extraordinary strength and his enduring mission as Israel's judge, even after years of suffering and humiliation. After being captured by the Philistines and blinded, Samson was led to Gaza, where he was confined in chains and forced to grind grain in the prison, a symbol of his utter defeat and the humiliation inflicted upon him by the enemies he had long opposed. During these long days and nights of captivity, his hair, which had been shorn by Delilah, began to grow again, a quiet sign that the Lord's Spirit might yet return to him. The Philistines, convinced that Samson was permanently powerless, decided to celebrate their victory in a grand public festival to honor their god, Dagon. They gathered in the temple, filling its vast halls with music, dancing, feasting, and mockery, rejoicing over the humiliation of Israel's once mighty deliverer. The temple's structure was supported by massive central pillars, which bore the weight of the building and the spectacle within. Samson was brought forth from prison to be displayed before the Philistines, mocked and jeered as a broken man. The lords of the Philistines placed him between the two central pillars, treating him as a curiosity, a trophy of their triumph. In that moment, Samson's awareness of the presence of his people and the desecration of God's name ignited a deep resolve within him. He prayed fervently to the Lord, acknowledging his failures and his reliance on divine power, asking for strength one last time to act as an instrument of deliverance. This prayer was both an appeal for restoration and an expression of faith that the Spirit of the Lord could yet empower him, even in his weakened state. It was a solemn, private act in the midst of public revelry, reflecting a heart attuned to God's purposes despite human frailty. With a renewed surge of strength granted by God, Samson gripped the two central pillars supporting the temple with all his remaining might. Leaning his full weight against them, he pushed with all his force. The structure trembled, the beams groaned, and the massive hall began to collapse. The pillars cracked and splintered, the temple's foundations gave way, and the roof fell in with overwhelming force. Thousands of Philistines inside the temple were crushed beneath the debris, including the lords who had celebrated Samson's humiliation. In this decisive act, Samson fulfilled God's plan, delivering a deadly blow to Israel's oppressors and asserting divine justice, even at the cost of his own life. Samson, too, perished in the destruction, becoming one with the ruin of the temple he had brought down. His death was simultaneous with the death of his enemies, marking a moment of dramatic vengeance and profound sacrifice. The people of Israel, although likely fearful of the Philistine retaliation, recognized that their judge had achieved a final deliverance through an act of extraordinary courage and faith. Samson's life, marked by feats of strength, acts of deliverance, and human weakness, concluded with a powerful, dramatic demonstration of God's empowerment, justice, and sovereignty. Thus ended the life of Samson, Israel's last judge of the period, whose story bridged human frailty and divine strength. He was remembered not only for the battles he waged and the strength he possessed, but also for the ultimate act of devotion and faith, in which his final moment of obedience and prayer brought both judgment upon Israel's enemies and fulfillment of the mission God had set before him. His legacy remained in the memory of Israel, a symbol of God's power working through a flawed but faithful servant, and the tale of his final act continued to inspire awe, fear, and reverence for generations to come. Micah's idolatry and the Levite. In the hill country of Ephraim, there lived a man named Micah, whose story illustrates both the struggles and the deviations of Israel during the period of the Judges. Micah was a man of considerable means. He possessed silver, which he had accumulated through inheritance or perhaps by his own industriousness. In a time when the tribes of Israel were prone to idolatry, Micah's heart wavered from the worship of the Lord. and he decided to create a tangible representation of divine power for himself. He took some of his silver, a total of 1,000 pieces, and gave it to a silversmith to fashion an image, a carved idol and a cast metal figure that he would use as an object of devotion. Micah believed that by creating this shrine and image, he could secure blessing, protection, or favor, perhaps reflecting the confusion and syncretism common in the land during the era when every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Having made the idol, Micah sought a spiritual guide to officiate and legitimize his new form of worship. He knew that having a priest would grant his shrine an air of authority, and so he approached one of the Levites from Bethlehem in Judah, a man wandering in the hill country. The Levite, perhaps seeking a position and sustenance, accepted Micah's offer to serve as priest. In return, Micah promised him a regular stipend, clothing, and sustenance, creating a system of personal devotion and religious service independent of the established tabernacle or priestly order at Shiloh. The Levite accepted, and thus Micah's household became a small center of idolatrous worship, with a functioning shrine, a priest, and sacred objects, blending traditional Levite ritual practices with the newly crafted idol. For some time, Micah's household functioned in relative isolation, with worship conducted according to his own specifications and the Levite performing rites over the idol. Micah was confident in the protection and favor he thought he had gained. However, the situation soon intersected with the movements of the tribe of Dan, who were themselves in search of a permanent inheritance. The Danites had not fully conquered the land allocated to them and had been wandering in search of territory to settle. Their scouts discovered the region where Micah lived and were impressed by the shrine and the presence of a Levite priest. Seeing the idol and its attendant Levite as a source of divine authority and legitimacy, the Danites plotted to take both for themselves, desiring to establish a religious center for their tribe. One night, the Danites acted. They came upon Micah's home and, under cover of darkness, seized the idol, the cast metal figure, and even the Levite who had been serving as priest. They did so with surprising ease, given that Micah had no substantial defense and had relied on the sanctity of his household objects to protect him. The Levite, though loyal to Micah during his service, was persuaded or, perhaps coerced to go with the Danites, who promised him a more significant position serving the larger community of his own tribe. Micah was left behind, stripped of his idol, his priest, and his spiritual center. When he confronted the Danites, he protested, claiming that they had taken his gods and his Levite. Yet the tribe dismissed him, saying that he had little recourse and that the Levite was free to follow them if he wished. Micah's protest could not alter the course of events. His idol and priest were gone, removed from the hill country of Ephraim to become instruments of worship in a new location. The Danites carried the stolen idol and the Levite northward, into the territory that they were seeking to settle. There, they came to Laish, an isolated city, and eventually captured it, renaming it Dan. The idol and Levite were installed in the city, establishing a new center of worship that mirrored the practices Micah had begun in Ephraim. The Levite assumed his role as priest over the tribe of Dan, now serving a broader population, while the idol, once a private household object, became a public religious symbol. This act effectively transformed the religious practices of a wandering tribe, embedding the worship of Micah's idol into the tribal system. Over time, this idolatry would influence the spiritual life of the Danites, as the idol became a fixture in the north, a tangible representation of Israel's departure from exclusive loyalty to God. Micah himself was left to live with the consequences of his actions, reflecting the instability that arose when individuals established their own forms of worship apart from God's command. His wealth, which had enabled him to create the idol, did not protect him from loss. The Levite, meanwhile, adapted to his new role with the Danites, transferring his loyalties and ritual expertise to a larger audience, but now in service of an idol rather than the God of Israel. The episode highlights the intertwining of ambition, misplaced trust in objects of metal and wood, and the vulnerabilities of individuals in a period when there was no centralized authority in Israel to regulate worship. The shrine in Laish, formerly Micah's home, remained a lasting symbol of how idolatry could travel and embed itself in new tribal territories, carrying forward the legacy of human deviation from God's covenantal directives. Thus, the story of Micah's idolatry and the Levite concludes with the migration of both the idol and priest into the hands of the Danites, establishing a religious center independent of God's command. The narrative reflects a period in Israel's history characterized by decentralized worship, personal devotion to idols, and the consequences of straying from divine instructions. It shows how individual choices, combined with the movements of tribes seeking identity and security, could shape the religious landscape of the nation, leaving both material and spiritual ramifications that endured for generations. The Danites migrate north. After the events surrounding Micah's idol and the Levite, the tribe of Dan found themselves in a precarious situation. Their assigned territory in southern Israel, near the Philistine-controlled coastal plains, had proved difficult to fully occupy and settle. The Philistines were powerful and well-entrenched, and the Danites, despite their size and strength, could not wrest control of the region allocated to them. Over time, dissatisfaction and restlessness grew within the tribe. They desired not only a secure homeland, but also a place where they could establish themselves politically, economically, and religiously. Their attention turned northward, toward the less defended and fertile lands beyond their original inheritance. A group of 600 warriors was selected from the tribe to spearhead the expedition. These men, skilled and determined, set out in search of a new place to dwell. They carried with them the stolen idol from Micah's household, as well as the Levite who had served as priest. Understanding that having a religious center would help unify the tribe and provide a sense of divine sanction for their endeavors, the idol and the priest became central to their plans, symbolizing both authority and spiritual legitimacy as they moved north. After traveling through the hill country and surveying the land, the Danites came upon the city of Laish. Laish was a remote, isolated city, located in a fertile and relatively peaceful valley. Its inhabitants, though prosperous, were few in number and largely disconnected from other surrounding tribes, making it vulnerable to attack. The Danites observed the city carefully, noting its defenses and weaknesses. Seeing an opportunity, they prepared to strike, knowing that capturing Laish would provide them a permanent home far from the Philistine threat. The Danites launched a swift and decisive attack on Laish. They burned the city with fire, surprising its inhabitants and overwhelming any resistance. The destruction was complete, leaving the original residents displaced or killed. In the aftermath, the Danites claimed the city for themselves. They rebuilt and fortified it, making it suitable for their settlement and for the administration of their tribal affairs. The city was renamed Dan, after their patriarch, marking a new chapter in the history of the tribe. This northern settlement offered fertile land for farming, abundant water sources, and strategic advantages for defense. Having secured Laish, the Danites established their religious practices there, bringing the stolen idol and Levite priest from Micah's hill country shrine. The Levite continued to serve as priest over the tribe, performing rituals and guiding the people in worship, though the worship was now idolatrous rather than devoted to the God of Israel. The idol, which had once been a private object of devotion in Ephraim, became a public center of ritual and cultic activity, reinforcing the tribe's spiritual and social cohesion. In this way, the Danites integrated religious and civic life, linking their political authority in the north with the presence of the idol. Over time, the settlement at Dan grew and prospered. Families established homes, cultivated the fertile land, and expanded their territory. The city became a focal point for northern Israel, serving as a base for trade, security, and cultural influence. The Danites maintained their idol as the heart of the community, and the Levite priest officiated over sacrifices and religious observances, creating a structured, though idolatrous, system of worship. The northern migration solidified the tribe's identity, offering them a homeland that was both defensible and spiritually significant in their own eyes. Micah himself was left to live with the consequences of his actions, reflecting the instability that arose when individuals established their own forms of worship apart from God's command. His wealth, which had enabled him to create the idol, did not protect him from loss. The Levite, meanwhile, adapted to his new role with the Danites, transferring his loyalties and ritual expertise to a larger audience, but now in service of an idol rather than the God of Israel. The episode highlights the intertwining of ambition, misplaced trust in objects of metal and wood, and the vulnerabilities of individuals in a period when there was no centralized authority in Israel to regulate worship. The shrine in Laish, formerly Micah's home, remained a lasting symbol of how idolatry could travel and embed itself in new tribal territories, carrying forward the legacy of human deviation from God's covenantal directives. Thus, the story of Micah's idolatry and the Levite concludes with the migration of both the idol and priest into the hands of the Danites, establishing a religious center independent of God's command. The narrative reflects a period in Israel's history characterized by decentralized worship, personal devotion to idols, and the consequences of straying from divine instructions. It shows how individual choices, combined with the movements of tribes seeking identity and security, could shape the religious landscape of the nation, leaving both material and spiritual ramifications that endured for generations. The Danites migrate north. After the events surrounding Micah's idol and the Levite, the tribe of Dan found themselves in a precarious situation. Their assigned territory in southern Israel, near the Philistine-controlled coastal plains, had proved difficult to fully occupy and settle. The Philistines were powerful and well-entrenched, and the Danites, despite their size and strength, could not wrest control of the region allocated to them. Over time, dissatisfaction and restlessness grew within the tribe. They desired not only a secure homeland, but also a place where they could establish themselves politically, economically, and religiously. Their attention turned northward, toward the less defended and fertile lands beyond their original inheritance. A group of 600 warriors was selected from the tribe to spearhead the expedition. These men, skilled and determined, set out in search of a new place to dwell. They carried with them the stolen idol from Micah's household, as well as the Levite who had served as priest. Understanding that having a religious center would help unify the tribe and provide a sense of divine sanction for their endeavors, the idol and the priest became central to their plans, symbolizing both authority and spiritual legitimacy as they moved north. After traveling through the hill country and surveying the land, the Danites came upon the city of Laish. Laish was a remote, isolated city, located in a fertile and relatively peaceful valley. Its inhabitants, though prosperous, were few in number and largely disconnected from other surrounding tribes, making it vulnerable to attack. The Danites observed the city carefully, noting its defenses and weaknesses. Seeing an opportunity, they prepared to strike, knowing that capturing Laish would provide them a permanent home far from the Philistine threat. The Danites launched a swift and decisive attack on Laish. They burned the city with fire, surprising its inhabitants and overwhelming any resistance. The destruction was complete, leaving the original residents displaced or killed. In the aftermath, the Danites claimed the city for themselves. They rebuilt and fortified it, making it suitable for their settlement and for the administration of their tribal affairs. The city was renamed Dan, after their patriarch, marking a new chapter in the history of the tribe. This northern settlement offered fertile land for farming, abundant water sources, and strategic advantages for defense. Having secured Laish, the Danites established their religious practices there, bringing the stolen idol and Levite priest from Micah's hill country shrine. The Levite continued to serve as priest over the tribe, performing rituals and guiding the people in worship, though the worship was now idolatrous rather than devoted to the God of Israel. The idol, which had once been a private object of devotion in Ephraim, became a public center of ritual and cultic activity, reinforcing the tribe's spiritual and social cohesion. In this way, the Danites integrated religious and civic life, linking their political authority in the north with the presence of the idol. Over time, the settlement at Dan grew and prospered. Families established homes, cultivated the fertile land, and expanded their territory. The city became a focal point for northern Israel, serving as a base for trade, security, and cultural influence. The Danites maintained their idol as the heart of the community, and the Levite priest officiated over sacrifices and religious observances, creating a structured, though idolatrous, system of worship. The northern migration solidified the tribe's identity, offering them a homeland that was both defensible and spiritually significant in their own eyes. Despite their success, the Danites' reliance on the idol symbolized a departure from the faith of their forefathers. The city of Dan would remain a center of idolatry for generations, becoming a cautionary example in Israel's history of how tribes could drift from God's commands when centralized worship and guidance were absent. Yet, for the Danites themselves, the northern migration represented triumph, opportunity, and security, a tangible fulfillment of their desire for land and self-determination. Thus, the story of the Danites' migration north culminates with the capture and destruction of Laish, the establishment of the city of Dan, and the continuation of the idolatrous practices brought from Ephraim. Their settlement in the north provided a permanent home, a tribal identity, and a religious structure centered on the Levite and the idol, leaving a lasting mark on the history and geography of Israel. The crime at Gibeah. In the hill country of Benjamin, in the town of Gibeah, a grievous and shocking event occurred that would shake all Israel to its core. A Levite from the region, traveling with his concubine, had sought lodging for the night in the town. Initially, no one seemed willing to take them in, but an old man, residing in Gibeah, offered hospitality and welcomed them into his home. This town, which had once been a part of the inheritance of Benjamin, was now marked by moral corruption and spiritual decay, though few could have foreseen the extent of the violence that would follow. As night fell, a band of wicked men of Gibeah surrounded the house. Their intentions were vile. They demanded that the Levite be brought out so that they might assault him. The Levite, desperate to protect himself, refused, offering instead his concubine to the mob. Tragically, the men seized the concubine and subjected her to brutal abuse throughout the night. By the time morning came, the Levite's concubine lay dead at the doorstep, a victim of the town's extreme lawlessness. At dawn, the Levite arose and, filled with grief and horror, found his concubine lifeless. Unable to bear the atrocity silently, he took her body and carried it home. There, he performed an act that was both shocking and symbolic. He cut her body into 12 pieces, carefully dividing them. Each piece was then sent to the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel, a message intended to awaken a sense of justice, outrage, and collective responsibility. The act was meant to convey the gravity of the crime, emphasizing that such wickedness could not be tolerated in the midst of God's people. As the pieces of the concubine reached each tribal leader, anger and horror swept across Israel. The tribes were confronted not only with the heinous act itself, but also with the realization that such moral corruption could exist within the land they claimed as their own inheritance. A national council convened, and representatives from all the tribes gathered to deliberate on the course of action necessary to respond to the crime. Discussions were fervent, emotions ran high, and the sense of shared outrage united the tribes in a rare moment of collective indignation. The leaders of Israel determined that the city of Gibeah and the tribe of Benjamin must be held accountable. The crime was seen as not merely an isolated incident, but as symptomatic of a deeper societal and moral decay. To ignore such an atrocity would be to condone lawlessness, and to undermine the covenantal standards that bound the people together under God's law. The Levite's grisly message had thus succeeded in mobilizing the nation, demanding that justice be sought and that the offenders be punished. Following the national outrage, the tribes of Israel assembled a militia to confront Gibeah and the surrounding towns of Benjamin. The crime had sparked not only a desire for justice, but also a determination to cleanse the land of pervasive sin and violence. Delegations and emissaries were sent, demanding that the perpetrators be handed over. The tribe of Benjamin, however, refused to comply, defending the men of Gibeah and preparing for conflict. What had begun as an act of individual atrocity escalated into a tribal standoff, setting the stage for civil war. The story of the Levite's concubine, her brutal death, and the Levite's shocking act of dismemberment became a symbol of the depths of human depravity that could manifest when law, justice, and piety were abandoned. It exposed the fragility of societal cohesion in Israel during the period of the Judges, when everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The outrage spread across the land, uniting the tribes against the perceived threat of moral anarchy represented by Gibeah and its protectors. In addition to inspiring collective action, the episode highlighted the role of communication and symbolism in ancient Israelite society. The sending of the 12 pieces of the concubine's body to the tribes was more than a message. It was a call to conscience, a means of galvanizing communal responsibility. It forced each tribe to confront the reality that sin within one town could threaten the integrity and spiritual health of the entire nation. The Levites' dramatic measure ensured that no one could ignore the atrocity. Ultimately, the crime at Gibeah set in motion a national crisis. The outrage of the tribes of Israel, stirred by the Levites' actions, would lead to military mobilization, prolonged conflict, and profound consequences for the tribe of Benjamin. The incident remains a stark testament to the consequences of lawlessness and the importance of communal accountability in the society of ancient Israel, marking one of the most infamous episodes in the period of the Judges. The horror of Gibeah, the national response, and the Levites' decisive if shocking action together provide a vivid account of a society grappling with moral collapse, tribal loyalty, and the urgent need for justice in a time when central authority was weak and human violence could escalate unchecked. Civil war against Benjamin and its aftermath, the outrage over the crime at Gibeah, and the steadfast refusal of the tribe of Benjamin to surrender the guilty men escalated into a full-scale conflict, plunging Israel into civil war. The 12 tribes of Israel, united in their indignation at the atrocity committed against the Levites' concubine, mobilized a formidable army. They demanded justice from the Benjaminites, but the men of Benjamin, fiercely loyal to their own and enraged by the accusations, refused to comply. The stage was set for a catastrophic confrontation, one that would shake the very fabric of the Israelite Confederation. The first battle took place near Gibeah, the epicenter of the crime. Israel's forces, arrayed in disciplined ranks, advanced upon the Benjaminites. At first, the superior numbers of Israel seemed decisive, yet the Benjaminites, fighting on their home ground and driven by tribal pride, repelled the attackers with ferocity. The battle was fierce and bloody. Many from Israel fell, and the tribes were initially disheartened, surprised at the strength and tenacity of Benjamin's warriors. The conflict revealed the deep divisions that existed within the Israelite Confederation, as old tribal rivalries and loyalties clashed with the collective call for justice. After the initial defeat, the tribes of Israel regrouped and mourned their losses. They sought counsel and resolved to intensify their effort, recognizing that unless Benjamin was humbled, the atrocity would remain unpunished and lawlessness would flourish. A second assault was launched. The Israelites devised new strategies, laying ambushes and encircling Benjamin's towns. They fought with greater coordination, combining the might of multiple tribes in a single, relentless advance. The Benjaminites, though valiant and skilled in combat, were gradually overwhelmed by the sheer weight of numbers and the tactical acumen of their adversaries. The fighting raged for days, leaving both sides exhausted and drenched in blood. Villages and homesteads were caught in the crossfire, and the once verdant countryside became a theater of destruction. The Israelite armies, determined to eradicate the evil exemplified by Gibeah, pressed on with unyielding resolve. The Benjaminites, though deeply committed to defending their kin and honor, suffered devastating losses. In the end, only a small remnant of the tribe survived. The majority of Benjamin's men had fallen in battle, and the towns and fortresses that had once flourished were reduced to smoldering ruins. In the aftermath of the war, Israel faced a troubling problem. The surviving Benjaminites, few in number and largely unmarried, faced the prospect of extinction. Without wives, the remnant could not perpetuate the tribe. The elders and leaders of Israel, recognizing both the justice of their cause and the necessity of preserving the nation's cohesion, devised measures to restore Benjamin. They recalled a law of Israel that forbade the destruction of entire families for religiously sanctioned reasons and sought solutions that would provide wives for the survivors without violating the integrity of other tribes. The first measure involved identifying women from Jabesh-Gilead, a town in the eastern part of Israel. A contingent of Israelite warriors was sent to capture unmarried women during a festival in Jabesh-Gilead, bringing them back to marry the remaining Benjaminites. This act, while harsh, was accepted as a practical solution in the context of the time, ensuring that the survivors could preserve their line. Yet even with this measure, there remained a shortage of wives for some of the remaining men. To address this, Israel permitted the Benjaminites to abduct women from Shiloh during a festival, again ensuring that the tribe could continue. These extraordinary measures, though violent, were aimed at restoring balance and continuity within the Israelite Confederation. Through these actions, the remnants of Benjamin were preserved. The tribe gradually recovered, though it never regained its former strength or reputation. The Civil War left an indelible mark on the nation, serving as a harsh reminder of the consequences of moral decay, unchecked sin, and the tribal divisions that could erupt into catastrophic conflict. The narrative emphasizes both the gravity of sin and the complexity of communal injustice in a society without centralized leadership. As the dust settled over the battlefield and the once vibrant towns lay in ruin, Israel returned to a state of uneasy normalcy. The nation had exacted justice for the crime at Gibeah, but the cost had been immense. Thousands had died, cities were destroyed, and the social fabric of the Benjaminites was forever altered. Leaders and elders reflected on the calamity, yet the cyclical pattern of sin, punishment, and deliverance persisted in the period of the Judges. The story of the civil war against Benjamin closed with a sobering refrain, capturing the moral and spiritual condition of Israel during this turbulent era. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This declaration, repeated throughout the accounts of the Judges, underscored the lack of central authority and the fragility of justice when individuals and tribes acted independently rather than under the guidance of God's law. It encapsulated a period marked by cycles of sin, conflict, and temporary reprieves, emphasizing the need for divine guidance and righteous leadership. Thus, the civil war against Benjamin and its aftermath stand as one of the most dramatic and tragic episodes in Israel's early history. It illustrates the tension between justice and survival, the consequences of communal sin, and the extraordinary measures sometimes necessary to preserve a people. The tribe of Benjamin endured, but the scars of the conflict remained, a lasting testament to the period of the Judges and the turbulent years when Israel lacked a king and moral clarity often gave way to human will and tribal loyalty. This episode, from the outbreak of war to the preservation of Benjamin through extraordinary measures, represents a defining moment in Israel's history, demonstrating the complex interplay of sign, punishment, and survival during the era of the Judges, and providing a somber coda to the story that began with the horrific crime at Gibeah